everybody, welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be the start of the story of why we left Nicaragua. I'm incredibly nervous right now. I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know how long this story is going to be because it's over the course of just over 2 months. I'm going to try my best to kind of break it up into different videos, but I also don't know where each video is going to stop and end because I'm just sitting down right now to try and get through as much of the story as I can for today. So if these videos start and stop kind of abruptly, that's why. There are so many details in this story that I don't know that I'll be able to get through all of the details, but I'll try and get through the most important ones. There's also other parts to the story that I'm not quite comfortable sharing right now, things that have to do with corruption, and you'll see as we go on, but I'm going to try and get out the main parts of the story. The first 2 weeks of this story will definitely take longer than the rest. This story plays out over just over 2 months, but yeah, I think we'll get started. I have notes down below, so many notes, like close to 200 pages of notes, so I'm just gonna do my best. And we'll start with day one. Okay, day one was a Sunday. Our family had just come back from a trip, like a local trip, but we were away with my parents as well, and we had all just arrived home. My husband left to drop off the pet sitter, which was a friend of one of my daughters. So she went along with him, and she lived locally, and it was just a normal day. It was the evening time, and well, close to evening time, it was like dusk time, and he left to drive her home. And the next thing I know, I got a phone call that he had been in an accident. This is so hard to talk about. Most of this story is going to be hard to talk about, but he had been turning left, and there was a motorcycle coming the other direction, and they collided. And the motorcyclist was not in good condition at all. When he called me, he was absolutely panicked. Luckily, the police and the paramedics were already on scene. And I didn't get too many details in that first phone call. But he just wanted to let me know, what had happened. He wouldn't be home right away. And yeah, we later found out that this motorcyclist had been intoxicated, was speeding, and unfortunately not wearing a helmet. So it was a really bad situation. Between the first phone call and when he called me back, my brain started spiraling, and I had known that given that we live in Nicaragua, when there's an accident and somebody is injured, more often than not, they do take you to the police station. So that had crossed my mind, and when he called me back, it had also crossed his mind as well. We still weren't sure at this time. The police were there, the paramedics were taking the man away, and we weren't sure what was going to happen. I believe I then got a third phone call where he did tell me that he was going to the police station with my daughter, and yeah, that he had to follow the police to the police station, and I was to meet them at the police station. Luckily, my husband and my daughter were fine, but the motorcyclist was not fine. He was in critical condition when he got taken away, and that's all we knew at that point in time. So I drove down to the police station in utter shock, and basically saw my husband very briefly. My daughter was sitting there, and they said that they needed to keep him, and I was to bring my daughter home. So that's the beginning of this very long story. The police couldn't tell me what was happening at that point in time. It's hard to remember, but I think they told me that I would find out more the next day, because by this time it was evening. I drove my daughter over to my parents where they were staying because I was in utter shock, and obviously she was not doing well given what she had just been through. And at that point in time, my husband was still texting me from the police station, kind of telling me what was going on as far as signing papers and all the things that they were doing. And we were consoling my daughter. And then the last text message I got for him, because all the text messages up to this point were pretty calm, pretty normal. And then the last text message I got from him was, "Call a lawyer ASAP." And that was completely, it startled me basically, because the rest of the conversation we're having was pretty calm. It had nothing to do with lawyers. So I immediately texted him back, like, why? I can't even remember what I texted him back, something like why or what happened. And it was delivered but not read. And then I texted him back immediately again, and it was not delivered. So his phone was off. And I remember that being an absolutely terrifying moment, because I had communication with him and then realized that they probably took his phone away, and that, he said, "Call a lawyer ASAP." So I didn't know what was happening to him in the police station. My mind was just going a million miles a minute. So I drove home that night with my daughter. Once I got everyone settled for bed, I reached out to a local in the community that we were friends with, because I figured being a local, they would know best what to do. I told them what happened, and he said, "Call a lawyer ASAP," and gave me a recommendation of a lawyer that he recommended. However, being a Sunday night, no lawyers' offices were going to be answering me. But in Nicaragua, a lot of lawyers, all types of businesses use WhatsApp, and do have use their personal WhatsApp. So I knew there was a possibility that I could reach somebody that night. And I remembered that a friend of mine from the community had used this lawyer before. So I reached out to her that evening to see if she had the direct WhatsApp of this particular lawyer. So she did have the WhatsApp of this particular lawyer, who I did end up messaging. However, they also had another recommendation, and from my experience living in Nicaragua and the weeks that went on, everybody has a lawyer that they trust, and everybody has lawyers that they don't trust, and everybody has their own opinions on what to do. And I got thrown so many different options and opinions over the next few weeks. But the first one was that night, and it was that they knew somebody in the community who was helping a lot of other families who had issues with the law or whatnot, all different various issues. And they knew somebody that basically coordinated getting the proper lawyers to help them out. They came highly, highly recommended, and I trusted them wholeheartedly, and I was willing to do anything at this point because I was absolutely terrified and didn't know what was happening. And basically my friends reached out to this guy. I'm gonna have to do fake names for everybody in this story. Okay, so we're gonna call him Mark. So my friends got me in contact with Mark that evening, and he was super responsive. And we just did so many text message conversations and so many phone calls that night, and I had so many questions, and I was absolutely scared to death because I didn't know what was going to happen next. He was just reassuring me of the process, and that I would get to see my husband the next day, and that I would meet his lawyers the next day, and that, everything would be okay. As I was getting ready for bed that night, this little side tangent, there's a lot of side tangents in this story, but I'll throw some of them in. I was getting my pajamas out of the closet, and I got stung by a scorpion. And it was my third time being stung by a scorpion. I think at that point is when I called my friend, and she's the one who ended up taking all these notes that I now have. We didn't know that was going to be the plan when I first called her. I just called her to tell her that my husband got in a car accident, and that the man wasn't doing well, and that he got taken to jail, and that I just got stung by a scorpion, and that I'd already contacted 2 sets of lawyers, and I just needed to talk to somebody. It was very late at night. And she was there for me. And in the end, after a few days, this story goes on and you find out how complicated and, you know, how much detail is involved. She ended up taking notes because I have a really bad memory, especially when it comes to trauma, and I wanted to be able to remember. And I wanted to be able to tell my husband, Harrison, who, you know, was in jail and I wasn't communicating with. So anyways, I'm super, super grateful for all the notes that I do have now. But it ended up being very, very long. So yeah, that evening I did try and go to sleep. I wasn't able to sleep, and at one point I picked up my phone and Mark had messaged me that the motorcyclist had passed away, which was horrifying and devastating and shocking. And obviously he had connections and was able to figure out that that happened. I didn't know what that meant at that point, and he just tried to calm me down and said that we would meet the next day. Okay, so day 2, I woke up really early, and I believe Mark had told me that I could go to the police station and see my husband. So I ended up going there super early in the morning, and the police told me that I was not able to see him, but that where's the food for him? Like, why didn't I bring him food? And I had remembered the night prior being like, can I bring anything for him? Do I need to do anything? Like asking all the questions, and they just told me no to everything. So when they told me that I needed to bring in food, I was very confused. And that's when I found out that they don't feed inmates in jail in Nicaragua. You have to bring them food 3 times a day during set hours. So I immediately went out and got him just some random breakfast at the grocery store next door, and dropped it off. Wasn't able to see him, but was able to drop it off, and then got on a phone call with Mark. So at this point, the original lawyer that I had messaged before Mark the night before never got back to me. They actually didn't get back to me until several days later. But Mark told me that we would meet at the police station at 10 a.m. and that I would get to see my husband, and that we would be meeting with the lawyers after that, and that there would be a recreation event of the accident. I showed up at the police station, and I saw my husband, and he was very scared, understandably. He had made friends with one police officer who spoke English. My husband's Spanish is not the greatest. Mine, I would say, is an intermediate level, and his is below that. So definitely a language barrier at the police station. And there was one police officer who had been there that week because it was a holiday week, from the next town over, and he spoke English. So he had been speaking to my husband that night and that morning, and had recommended his lawyer. So the police officer had a lawyer recommendation who was at the police station at this time. And at this point, we don't have much time to talk. So I'm quickly trying to tell my husband that, you know, I already have lawyers set up. I'm about to meet with them. They come highly recommended. And my gut was just telling me, don't go with the police officer's recommendation for a lawyer. I don't know why, but my gut was just telling me that. And that lawyer was there. He was very nice. But I was also explaining to him that Mark would be meeting me here as well, and that I already had lawyers set up. At the same time, Mark entered the police station. So this is the first time I met him in person, and he walked right past me and straight into the police chief's office. I'm not sure what he did in there, but he walked around that building like he absolutely knew what he was doing, and that, you know, he was in charge, and gave me a lot of confidence. And I spoke to him briefly. He said that he was going to meet us at the recreation event, and yeah, it was just, this all happened all at the same time. All of these conversations at the same time. The English speaking police officer said to my husband that he didn't like that guy. Mark didn't trust that guy, and that we should really go with his lawyer. And it was like all of this on me all of a sudden. I didn't know what to do. I obviously just wanted to make the best decision for my husband, but I didn't know what to do in that moment. And at the exact same moment is when they took my husband out of the police station. He got put in the back of a police truck and driven to the scene of the accident. And as he drove past me, he yelled out the back of the truck, "Don't use Mark's lawyers, because the police officer had just warned him about Mark. And it felt, that was one of the first moments that I felt like I was in a movie. Like, how is this real life? It was just a horrifying moment, because I was standing on the side of the street and I didn't know what decision to make, and I didn't know what was the right decision. I then got in my vehicle. My parents were still with me, and the kids were at home. And I got in my vehicle and we followed them to the scene of the accident. So the recreation event is traumatizing, to be quite honest. It's where they brought our vehicle and they brought the motorcycle and they set it up exactly like the accident took place so that they could recreate the event. They made my husband get in the vehicle and drive up to where the collision with the motorcycle happened himself while they took measurements. And at this whole point in time, it's on a busy road. People are driving by and taking pictures as if the accident just happened in that moment. I can only imagine what my husband was feeling in that moment. After just finding out that the man had passed away the night before. They did tell him when he was in jail, they woke him up that night to tell him that the man had passed away. So he was having all sorts of emotions about that. And yeah, they made him recreate the event. And then we did get some time to speak just briefly while they were finishing up doing that. And again, it was me trying to explain to him that this Mark guy and his lawyers are like, I think at this point, Mark had given me more details about his lawyers and how, you know, well known they are and powerful they are. And I was just feeling really confident about Mark at this point and not so confident about using the police officer's recommendation. So he told me that he trusted me, and we said goodbye. And I didn't know when I would be able to see him again, because in the jail in Nicaragua, there's one visitation a week, 15 minutes on a Wednesday, and this was a Monday. So I didn't know if I would be able to see him again prior to Wednesday. So after that, I drove over to Nicholas's place with my mom. And that's when we really sat down with him for the first time, and he told me, you know, more about his lawyers and the plan and what would happen. Because typically in Nicaragua, when someone's involved in a car accident, they're held in jail until they can figure out, you know, who's at fault, and any mediation process with the family, if that's going to take place. Typically it's a quick process, but as you'll see in our situation, it was not a quick process. But yeah, so that's where I really got to talk to him for the first time. He only spoke Spanish, and again, I would say I'm an intermediate level, so I can understand the majority of what he's saying, but as far as my abilities to communicate, I can communicate, but not that great. So the friends that had recommended him told me that they had other friends, again, friends of friends, and these friends are gonna need names as well. Okay, we'll call them Sarah and Dan. So Sarah and Dan lived across the street from Mark's house, and were bilingual and great translators. And so she had called them up and asked them to come help us out with the communication. So they were there with us as well. Really lovely people. At that point, Mark told us that the lawyers would be showing up from Managua, which is the capital city. He said that's where they work out of, and that they would be showing up in an hour, and that they would need payment up front. And I'm not going to talk about any numbers in any of these videos because there's a lot of different payments that occur and I just don't feel comfortable. But it was a large sum of money that they needed up front when I was to meet with them in an hour. And I only got an hour's notice. And I remember turning to Sarah and Dan and being like, this seems like a large amount of money. And they agreed with me that it seemed like a large amount of money. They had helped Mark and other people in the community when Mark had helped them with other cases. So they were kind of questioning Mark, like, why is it so much? It hadn't been so much for other people. And his reasoning was that because there was a death involved, and this is just much more serious. He's just using more serious lawyers, and that's their fee. And he gave them confidence, which then gave me confidence, but wanted to mention that now because it will come into play later. So my mom and I were like, how are we gonna get this amount of money in the next hour? Our cards have limits as far as how much we can take out. And Sarah and Dan basically rallied for us. They had some money of their own, and they were able to reach out to people in the community, and they were able to come up with half the money. And my mom and I ran around to all the different banks and used all the different cards we had, and came up with the other half of the money. And somehow, miraculously, we came up with the money in an hour. And we were able to pay Sarah and Dan back within the next few days. But obviously, we couldn't take out that amount of money in one day. Okay, I'm going to be looking down a bit at my notes just so I catch everything. But an hour later, we met with the lawyers. There was 2 lawyers and a third man that all came and sat down with us. And we still had the translators, Sarah and Dan, there as well. They let us know that the man who passed away in the accident was related to the president of the country. That's one of the first things that they told us, which obviously horrified us. But then they said, but it's okay because this third man, I hope you guys are following me, this third man who wasn't the lawyer but was there with the lawyers was apparently related to the family of the boy who passed away. And he had said that he had already spoken to them on the phone, and that he had a good relationship with them, and that it's really good we're working with them because he has this connection. They basically told me all the information that I needed to gather for them and more information about the process. We knew at this point that my husband would most likely be at fault. He was turning left in the car accident, regardless of the fact that the driver was speeding and intoxicated. And in Nicaragua, when you're at fault in a car accident where there's a death involved, again, this is very difficult to talk about, but you have 2 options. You can mediate with the family, or it's jail time, 3 to 5 years. And all this information was coming to me at once. Mediation with the family involves a sum of money as compensation to the family. So obviously that was our hope at that period in time, and the lawyers had spoken to the family, or the one guy who wasn't a lawyer had spoken to the family and gave condolences and made it sound like, that's the route that they would be interested in. They then told me that the next day my husband would likely be moved to the jail in the next town over, the larger town, and that he would go before a judge, and that I would need to prepare a speech for the family, and that I would get to meet the family. I think those were all the details for that evening. I did not see my husband again that evening. I did ask about his phone and his wallet and things like that, because I think at that point I knew I had to do a banking related issue or a bill or something, and his phone was connected to the 2-factor authentication. Again, these details aren't really relevant now, but they come up later. I was told that all his belongings were sent to the next town over, and that I could not get his belongings. And then that evening, well, pretty much since the accident, my phone was blowing up like it's never blown up before. Everybody in the community, people I didn't even know, just, seeing if I'm okay, and also giving their lawyer recommendations. The amount of recommendations I was given was absolutely mind-blowing. I didn't even know there were that many lawyers. But of course, everybody has their own trusted people, and people just wanted to help. And for the most part, I just, thanked people. It was very overwhelming. But my mom and I, because she was there for the whole thing, were very confident in our decision at this point to stick with who we had. So that was all day 2. And at that point, I hadn't spoken to my friend here in Canada who had called the night before all day. And I called her to tell her all of that. There was so much more, but those are the main things. And that's at the point where she started taking notes for me, which continued on. So I think I'm going to stop part 1 here. I don't know how long this will be. I'm going to edit it right now and see how long it is, and then start part 2 right away.